The security drones converged on the human before anyone else noticed. Kale Chen stood perfectly still in the grand assembly hall of Galactic Academy, his hands at his sides, while 3 hovering sentinels locked their targeting arrays on his chest. The hall fell silent. 2,000 students from 47 species watched as the Academy's elite royal guard materialized from the shadows, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the vaulted ceiling's bioluminescent panels. They moved like water, soundless and inevitable. Commander Vethra of the Cos Dominion stepped forward, her 4 eyes fixed on the human. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone commanded absolute authority. Behind her, the rest of the guard formed a precise semicircle, blocking every exit from Kale's position near the center aisle. The young human was 17 standard years old, barely into his 2nd semester at the most prestigious institution in known space, and now he stood surrounded by warriors who had protected monarchs across centuries. "Step back from the barrier," Vethra said quietly. Her voice carried despite its softness, engineered by evolution to cut through chaos without raising volume. Kale didn't move. His dark eyes stayed fixed on something beyond the guards, beyond the assembled students, toward the sealed doors of the royal receiving chamber. The translucent energy barrier that separated the common hall from the sovereign's approach shimmered 2 meters in front of him. No student had crossed that line in the Academy's 400-year history. The penalty was immediate expulsion and planetary exile. "I need to speak with her," Kale said. His voice didn't shake, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Before the ceremony begins." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Several Thornian students chittered in their clicking language. A pair of Valkyrie exchanged what might have been horrified glances through their crystalline features. Everyone knew the protocol. Queen Charess of the Eternal Throne was arriving for the Founding Day ceremony, an event that occurred once every 10 cycles. She would address the student body, bestow honors on the top scholars, and renew the ancient pact between the Academy and the 17 core worlds. The ceremony was sacred. The protocols were absolute. Vethra tilted her head, studying the human with the same clinical precision she might use examining a malfunctioning weapon. "You understand what you're requesting?" "I understand what I'm risking," Kale replied. "It's not the same thing." The commander's mandibles twitched, a gesture that, in her species, indicated either amusement or contempt, sometimes both. She raised one clawed hand, and the security drones adjusted their positions, moving closer but not firing. "Not yet." "Explain," Vethra commanded. Kale swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him to back down, to apologize, to return to his seat among the other first-cycle students. But his hand moved to the pocket of his academy uniform, and that simple gesture made every guard in the room tense. Energy weapons hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. The drones targeting lasers painted red dots across his chest. "Slowly," Vethra said, her voice dropping even lower. Kale withdrew a small data crystal, holding it between his thumb and forefinger where everyone could see. The crystal pulsed with a faint blue light, indicating active encryption. "Academy-grade security. Possibly higher. This contains information about the delegation from Kestar," Kale said. "The Queen's own world. Information she needs to see before she enters this hall." The silence deepened, became something almost physical. Professor Merquin, the Academy's headmaster, rose from his position on the observation platform. His silver robes rustled as he descended the steps, his ancient face carved with concern. He was Valkyrie, a species known for patience measured in centuries, but even he moved with unusual speed. "Student Chen," Merquin said, his voice resonant with harmonics that could calm violent crowds, "you are aware that making unsubstantiated claims about royal delegations constitutes treason in 14 sovereign systems." "I'm aware," Kale said. "I'm also aware that 3 members of that delegation aren't who they claim to be." The words hung in the air like a blade. Vethra's expression didn't change, but her hand moved to the weapon at her hip, a gesture of readiness rather than threat. The Royal Guard didn't draw weapons on students. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was weapon enough. "How could you possibly know this?" Merquin asked, stepping closer but stopping well before the barrier. Even he wouldn't cross that line. Kale's jaw tightened. "Because I've seen their genetic markers. Because I compared them to the official registry. Because I'm not supposed to have access to either of those databases, but I found a way in anyway." He looked directly at Vethra. "I broke Academy law. I violated 3 separate security protocols. I committed what you would call digital intrusion. And I'd do it again, because what I found proves that someone is planning to kill Queen Charess the moment she steps through those doors." The hall erupted. Students surged to their feet, voices rising in a dozen languages. The security drones scattered to maintain crowd control, their weapons shifting targets as panic rippled outward. Only the Royal Guard remained perfectly still, their discipline absolute even as chaos bloomed around them. Vethra raised her hand again, and the hall fell silent, as if cut by a blade. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the human student, until only the barrier separated them. Her 4 eyes studied Kale's face with an intensity that made several observers look away. "If you're lying," she said quietly, "you will spend the rest of your life in a detention facility so deep that light takes days to reach it." "I know," Kale whispered. "If you're telling the truth," Vethra continued, "you've just prevented an act of war that would have shattered the peace accords and plunged 7 systems into conflict." Kale nodded once sharply. The commander's hand moved faster than human eyes could track, and the data crystal vanished from Kale's fingers. She turned it over once, examining the encryption patterns, then closed her fist around it. "You will come with me. You will explain everything, and you will hope that your evidence is as solid as your courage." She gestured, and 2 guards moved to flank Kale, not touching him but establishing clear boundaries. The barrier shimmered and died, opening a path that no student should walk. Kale stepped through, and the air itself seemed to thicken with the weight of broken protocol. "Commander," Professor Merquin called out, his voice strained, "the Queen arrives in 7 minutes." Vethra didn't look back. "Then we have 7 minutes to verify his claims. Clear the hall. Seal all entrances. No one moves until I give the word." The guards moved like a single organism, herding 2,000 students toward the emergency exits with practiced efficiency. Kale walked between his escorts, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Through the receiving chamber's inner doors, he could hear the distant sound of approaching footsteps, royal footsteps. And somewhere in that approaching delegation, hidden among trusted advisors and honored guests, walked someone who had come to commit murder before the eyes of the galaxy's future leaders. The data crystal pulsed in Vethra's hand, its blue light reflecting off her armor like captured lightning, and Kale realized that the next 7 minutes would determine whether he'd saved a queen or destroyed his own life for nothing. The inner chamber was smaller than Kale expected, lined with tapestries from worlds he'd only read about. Vethra moved to a secure console embedded in the wall, inserting the data crystal with practiced precision. Her fingers danced across holographic controls while the other guards formed a protective perimeter. Kale stood in the center, acutely aware that he was surrounded by warriors who could end his life before he could blink. The console chimed, and data flooded across multiple screens. Genetic sequences, identity verification logs, travel records, security clearances. Vethra's eyes moved rapidly, processing information faster than Kale could follow. Her expression remained neutral, but her mandibles clicked twice, a sound he'd learned meant deep concentration. "Show me how you obtained this," she commanded without looking away from the screens. Kale stepped forward carefully. "I was working on a xenobiology project 3 weeks ago, analyzing genetic diversity among diplomatic corps members. It's standard curriculum for comparative biology students, but when I ran the samples through the Academy's database, 3 profiles from the Kastar delegation showed microvariations in their genetic markers." "Variations small enough to pass standard security screening," Vethra said, still reading. "Exactly. But too large to be natural mutation. Someone altered these profiles. Not recently, years ago. Deep enough in the system that casual verification wouldn't catch it. But when I cross-referenced with the original genetic registry from Kastar's sovereign database, the markers didn't match. These 3 individuals are carrying false identities sophisticated enough to fool almost everyone." Vethra finally turned to face him. "Almost everyone, but not a human student with barely 2 semesters of academy training." Kale felt his face flush. "My mother was a data forensics specialist. Before she died, she taught me how to see patterns in information, how to find what people try to hide. I wasn't trying to uncover a conspiracy. I was just following the data and breaking multiple laws in the process." "Yes." The commander studied him for a long moment. "Your mother." "What was her name?" "Dr. Sarah Chen. She worked for Earth's intelligence division before the integration." Something shifted in Vethra's expression, too subtle for Kale to interpret. She turned back to the console, fingers moving faster now. "I knew Sarah Chen. We worked together during the Frontier Wars. She was brilliant. Stubborn. She would absolutely have taught her child to question everything and trust nothing at face value." The commander paused. She would also have taught you that evidence means nothing without proper chain of custody and official verification. She taught me that truth matters more than protocol. Truth without proof is just opinion. Vethra pulled up a new screen, this one showing real-time positioning data. The delegation is 1 minute from the outer doors. I have your evidence, but I cannot act on information obtained through illegal means. Do you understand what that means? Kale's chest tightened. You're saying even if I'm right, you can't use this. I'm saying the evidence is inadmissible under 17 different sovereign laws, but I'm also saying that I now know what to look for. She touched a control, and the screen shifted to show live feeds from the approaching delegation. 23 individuals in formal robes, moving through the Academy's outer corridors with ceremonial precision. At the center, surrounded by her personal guard, walked Queen Charess herself, a figure of ancient power draped in living light. Vethra zoomed in on 3 specific faces. These 3. Show me exactly what you found. Kale moved beside her, pointing to specific data points. This one, Ambassador Krell, his genetic markers show Kestari baseline with modifications consistent with Vrex infiltration techniques. The second, Cultural Liaison Sorthin, has identical modification patterns but different base genetics entirely. The third, Honor Guard Captain Vesqua, shows the most sophisticated alterations. She's not even Kestari. Best guess, she's Vrex pure blood using a full genetic mask. The Vrex Collective has been at peace with the core worlds for 40 years, Vethra said, but her voice carried doubt. The official Vrex government. Yes, but there are splinter factions, groups that never accepted the treaty. My mother tracked them for years. They specialize in long-term infiltration. Patient, methodical, willing to wait decades for the perfect moment. Kale pointed to the timestamps on the altered records. These identities were established 6 years ago, long before this ceremony was even scheduled. Whoever planned this has been positioning assets for years. Vethra's hand moved to her communication device, then stopped. If I call for a security halt based on illegally obtained evidence, I violate the Queen's treaty rights. If I accuse members of her personal delegation without absolute proof, I create a diplomatic incident that could shatter the alliance. But if I do nothing, and you're correct, the Queen dies, and 17 worlds go to war. I know, Kale whispered. The commander closed her eyes briefly, a gesture of deep thought. When she opened them, her voice was absolutely steady. You broke the rules because you believed lives were at stake. Now I must decide if your judgment is worth trusting over centuries of protocol. She opened a secure channel on her comm device. This is Commander Vethra to Royal Guard Prime. Execute Silent Protocol 7. I want full-spectrum scans on the following individuals as they enter the security checkpoint. She read off 3 names. Kale recognized them immediately. The 3 false identities. Commander? A voice crackled back. Protocol 7 requires sovereign authorization. The Queen must approve invasive scanning of her own delegation. Then get me that authorization. Now. Tell her I'm invoking emergency powers under the Preservation Clause. She'll understand. That hasn't been used in 2 centuries, which should tell you how serious this is. Move. The comm channel closed. Vethra turned to Kale, her expression harder than diamond. If you're wrong, I've just destroyed my career and created a diplomatic catastrophe. If you're right, you've saved countless lives while simultaneously committing crimes that should see you imprisoned. Either way, you'll never be a normal student again. I know, Kale said for the 3rd time. Stop saying that. You don't know. You can't possibly understand what you've set in motion. She gestured, and the guards opened a hidden door in the chamber's far wall. You'll wait in there until this is resolved. You don't speak. You don't interfere. You watch what happens when someone chooses truth over law, and you live with the consequences. Kale moved toward the door, then stopped. Commander, my mother used to say that the difference between courage and stupidity is whether you're right. I hope I'm not stupid. Your mother also knew that sometimes you can be both at the same time. She proved that when she died exposing a conspiracy that everyone said didn't exist. Vethra's voice softened slightly. She was right too, and it didn't save her. The hidden door closed behind Kale, sealing him in an observation chamber with one-way viewing panels. He could see the receiving room, see the guards taking positions, see Vethra standing perfectly still as she waited for either vindication or disaster. Through the outer doors, he heard the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. The Queen was arriving. The doors opened with ceremonial slowness, engineered to create a moment of awe. Queen Charess entered first, her form difficult to describe in words because she existed partially in dimensions human senses couldn't quite process. She appeared as living light, wearing the shape of something vaguely humanoid, her presence filling the room with a sensation like standing before a star. Her personal guard flanked her, 3 on each side, their armor crafted from materials that predated most current civilizations. Behind them came the delegation, 23 individuals representing every major aspect of Kastari culture and government. Kale's eyes locked on the 3 faces he'd memorized. Ambassador Krell, moving with the precise dignity expected of someone who'd spent 40 years in diplomatic service. Cultural liaison Sorthan, younger, carrying himself with the confidence of nobility. Honor Guard Captain Vesqua, walking with the economical grace of a warrior who'd trained for decades. They all looked perfect. They all fit their roles flawlessly. Commander Vethra stepped forward, executing a formal bow that conveyed both respect and authority. Your Radiance, welcome to Galactic Academy. Before we proceed to the Grand Hall, security protocols require standard verification of all attendees. Queen Charess tilted her head, an almost human gesture that somehow conveyed both amusement and curiosity despite her alien nature. When she spoke, her voice resonated in wavelengths that bypassed ears entirely and touched the mind directly. Commander Vethra, I recognize you from the Frontier Wars. You served with distinction alongside the Human Intelligence Division. Under what authority do you invoke security protocols on my personal delegation? The Preservation Clause, Your Radiance. Emergency powers granted to Royal Guard commanders when they have reasonable cause to believe sovereign lives are threatened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several delegation members stiffened. Ambassador Krell's expression remained neutral, but Kale noticed his left hand move fractionally closer to the ceremonial sash he wore. Cultural liaison Sorthan smiled slightly, a reaction that seemed wrong for the moment. Captain Vesqua simply stood perfectly still, her eyes scanning the room with professional precision. Reasonable cause, Queen Charess repeated. Explain. I cannot provide details without compromising an ongoing investigation, but I request permission to conduct full-spectrum genetic and identity verification on 3 members of your delegation. You suspect infiltration. I suspect nothing, Your Radiance. I have evidence that requires verification through proper channels. The Queen's light pulsed, shifting through colors that suggested deep thought. Name them. Vethra didn't hesitate. Ambassador Krell. Cultural liaison Sorthan, Honor Guard Captain Vesqua. The 3 named individuals showed no reaction. Their training was too good for that. But Kale saw what he'd learned to look for from his mother's teachings. Micro-expressions. Tiny adjustments in posture. The almost imperceptible shift in breathing patterns that suggested sudden stress. They were prepared for many scenarios, but not this. Not being identified specifically, these are my most trusted advisors, Queen Charess said, her voice resonating with something that might have been offense, or might have been curiosity. Ambassador Krell has served the Eternal Throne for 4 decades. Captain Vesqua has protected my family for 20 years. On what basis do you question their loyalty? I question nothing, Your Radiance. I verify everything. That is my oath. The Queen regarded Vethra for a long moment, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she nodded once, a gesture that rippled through dimensions. Proceed with verification. But, Commander, if this is mistaken, if you have acted on false information, the consequences will be severe. I understand, Your Radiance. Vethra gestured, and 3 royal guards stepped forward, each carrying scanning equipment that looked delicate enough to be ceremonial but hummed with barely contained power. They approached the 3 named individuals with professional courtesy, requesting permission before activating the scanners. Ambassador Krell submitted to the scan with perfect grace, his expression showing mild annoyance but nothing more. The scanner passed over him, reading genetic markers at a depth that went beyond surface tissue, comparing cellular structure to registered profiles in the royal database. The device chimed red. The sound was small, almost gentle, but it crashed through the room like thunder. Every guard drew weapons simultaneously, moving with the synchronized precision of a single organism. The delegation scattered, several members crying out in alarm. Queen Charess remained perfectly still, her light shifting to colors that Kale's human brain interpreted as cold fury. Genetic markers do not match registered profile for Ambassador Krell, the scanning device announced in a neutral automated voice. Identity verification failed. Probability of biological fraud, 97.3%. Ambassador Krell's expression never changed. This is absurd. A scanning malfunction. "I demand step away from her radiance," Vethra commanded, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "Now." Then he smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face into something alien and terrible. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years of perfect service. 40 years of waiting. And undone by a scanning malfunction? I think not. He moved faster than physics should have allowed, his hand blurring as it reached beneath his ceremonial sash. But royal guards were trained for threats that moved at relativistic speeds, and Vethra had positioned herself perfectly. Her weapon discharged, not with fire or projectiles, but with a field of force that locked Krell's muscles into paralysis before his hand could close on whatever weapon he'd hidden. He froze mid-motion, unable to complete the attack but conscious enough to understand his failure. "Scan the other two," Vethra ordered. Cultural liaison Sorthin didn't wait for the scanner. He dropped his facade entirely, his form shimmering as genetic camouflage systems failed under stress. The young nobleman's face melted away, revealing features that were close to Kastari but fundamentally wrong. Vrex Collective, just as Kale had suspected. Sorthin lunged toward the Queen, but her personal guard intercepted him with brutal efficiency, 3 bodies forming a living shield that nothing short of starship weapons could penetrate. That left Captain Vesqua. She stood perfectly still, watching everything with calm professional interest. When the scanner approached her, she raised her hands slowly, showing they were empty. "Commander Vethra," she said quietly, "you're Sarah Chen's child, aren't you? The one who found us." Kale's blood froze in the observation chamber. Vethra's expression didn't change. "Scanner." "No need," Vesqua said. She reached up and touched a spot behind her ear, and her genetic camouflage peeled away like shed skin. The Kastari features dissolved, revealing a Vrex warrior in her prime, muscles dense with augmented strength, eyes cold with professional calculation. "I am Captain Vesqua of the Vrex Redemption Front. I have served in this position for 6 years, 4 months, and 17 days. The real Captain Vesqua died during the frontier skirmish that was officially recorded as a training accident. I have fulfilled her duties flawlessly. I have protected Queen Charess from 7 separate assassination attempts by other factions. I have been loyal to this mission beyond all else. Your mission being her death," Vethra stated. "My mission being revenge." Vesqua looked directly at Queen Charess, showing no fear despite being surrounded by weapons. "The peace treaty your government signed with the core worlds required the Vrex Collective to surrender sovereignty of our outer territories. Billions of my people were displaced, forced to integrate, forced to abandon our cultural identity. Your signature on that treaty destroyed our civilization as surely as if you'd glassed our worlds from orbit. The alternative was war that would have killed trillions," Queen Charess said, her voice resonating with ancient authority. "Your leaders chose peace. Our leaders chose survival. I chose honor." Vesqua smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "And I would have succeeded. We were positioned perfectly. 3 operatives with deep cover and perfect timing. We would have struck during the ceremony in front of 2,000 students from 47 worlds. Your death would have been witnessed by the galaxy's future leaders. It would have fractured the alliance, sparked conflict, given my people the chaos they need to reclaim what was stolen. You would have murdered an innocent sovereign to start a war," Vethra said. "I would have killed a tyrant who hides her tyranny behind diplomatic language and calls it peace." Vesqua's eyes shifted to the one-way observation panel where Kale stood hidden. She shouldn't have been able to see him, but somehow she looked directly at him anyway. "But we were found by a child, a human child playing with databases he shouldn't have accessed, finding patterns he shouldn't have recognized. Sarah Chen's son. Of course it would be her legacy that unmade us." "You knew my mother," Kale whispered, though she couldn't hear him through the panel. Vesqua continued as if she had. "Your mother discovered our organization 8 years ago. She tracked us across 17 systems. She found evidence that should have destroyed us, but she was silenced before she could present her findings to the proper authorities. We made it look like an accident, a transport malfunction. No one questioned it, no one except her child, apparently, who learned everything she knew and finished what she started." Vethra's weapon never wavered. "You're admitting to the murder of Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm admitting to nothing that will matter. We failed today, but others will continue. The treaty is unjust. The peace is a lie. And eventually, someone will succeed where we could not." Vesqua smiled again. "Take me into custody. Execute me. It changes nothing. The Vrex Redemption Front has operatives in places you can't imagine. protected by cover so deep that even genetic scanning won't find them. This was one attempt. There will be others. Perhaps, Queen Charess said, and her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room feel small. But not today, and not against me, because today I live. Today your conspiracy dies, and today I learned that a human child has more courage and integrity than those who claim to serve me. She turned to Vethra. Release him. Bring the student forward. The observation chamber door opened. Kale stepped out on shaking legs, acutely aware that he was standing in a room with a living goddess, captured terrorists and warriors who could kill him accidentally while reaching for coffee. He walked forward until he stood before Queen Charess, his head barely reaching the center of her radiant form. Kneel, Vethra whispered. Kale dropped to one knee, keeping his eyes down. The queen's light washed over him, warm and terrible and impossibly ancient. When she spoke, her voice touched something deep in his chest that had nothing to do with sound. Kale Chen. You broke laws to find truth. You violated protocol to prevent murder. You risked everything to protect someone you've never met. Your actions today saved my life and prevented a war that would have consumed worlds. She paused, and Kale felt her attention settle on him like physical weight. They also marked you as someone who will never fit comfortably within normal boundaries.
You will be watched, suspected.
A question for the rest of your life because you proved willing to cross lines that others consider sacred? I know, Kale whispered. Stop saying that, Vethra muttered. Queen Charess made a sound that might have been laughter. Rise, Kale Chen. Look at me. He stood slowly, lifting his eyes to meet her impossible gaze. Up close, she was even more overwhelming. Existence given consciousness, light made sovereign, but her voice gentled, became almost kind. Your mother would be proud, and furious, and proud again. She knew the cost of choosing truth over comfort. She paid that cost with her life. You've chosen to walk the same path. That takes courage that most beings will never understand. The queen gestured, and something materialized in the air before Kale. A small crystal medallion glowing with internal light suspended on a chain of woven starlight. This is the Star of Preservation. It is given only to those who have saved sovereign lives at personal cost. Only 17 exist in the entire galaxy. You are now the 18th bearer. The medallion settled around Kale's neck, warm against his chest. He stared at it, unable to form words. Wear it always, Queen Charess continued. It grants you certain immunities and authorities. It also marks you as someone who has proven their judgment worthy of trust. Commander Vethra, your recommendation? Vethra stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. The student broke laws, violated protocols, accessed restricted databases without authorization. By all standard procedures, he should face expulsion and criminal charges. She paused, letting the words settle. However, his actions prevented an act of war. His judgment, while unorthodox, proved more reliable than our official security systems. I recommend formal censure for his violations, combined with immediate recruitment into advanced security training. His skills are too valuable to waste, and his tendency to ignore rules makes him perfect for intelligence work. So noted, the queen turned back to Kale. You have 1 week to decide. Return to normal student life, carrying the knowledge of what you've done but pursuing conventional education. Or accept training that will transform you into something different, something necessary, something that will ask you to make impossible choices again and again. Kale thought of his mother, of the years she'd spent hunting shadows, finding patterns in chaos, choosing truth even when it killed her. He thought of the 3 terrorists standing paralyzed in the room, their 6-year mission destroyed by one curious student. He thought of the 2,000 Academy students who would attend the ceremony without ever knowing how close they'd come to witnessing an assassination. I don't need a week, he said quietly. My mother taught me that some people are born to ask questions everyone else is too comfortable to consider. I think I'm one of those people. Then you accept? I accept. Queen Charess nodded, a gesture that rippled through probability itself. Then hear me, Kale Chen. You are no longer simply a student. You are now an operative of the Sovereign Trust, answerable only to the highest authorities, bound by oaths that supersede normal law, and tasked with finding truths that others would prefer remain hidden. You will make enemies. You will be called traitor and hero, often by the same people. You will cross lines and break rules and choose between impossible options, and you will do this knowing that humanity will be judged by your actions because You are the first human to ever hold this position. The weight of it settled on Kale's shoulders like armor forged from responsibility. He felt the medallion pulse against his chest, synchronizing with his heartbeat. Around the room, the royal guard stood at attention, witnessing the moment when everything changed. "I understand," Kale said, and this time the words felt different. "True, good." The queen gestured, and the 3 captured terrorists vanished in columns of light, transported to holding facilities beyond reach or rescue. "Then your first assignment begins now. Commander Vithara will brief you on the Vrex Redemption Front's organizational structure. You will help us find the other operatives hidden throughout the core worlds. You will finish what your mother started." The throw moved to Kale's side. "This way, Operative Chen. We have much work to do." As they walked toward the secure briefing chambers, Kale glanced back once. Through the doors, he could see the Grand Assembly Hall, where 2,000 students waited, expecting the ceremony that would now be delayed while security swept for additional threats. They would hear eventually about what happened, filtered through official statements and carefully managed information. They would know a human student had prevented an assassination. They would never know the full truth of the cost. That was fine. Kale was beginning to understand that truth and public knowledge were often different things. His mother had known that, had died knowing it. Now he would live knowing it too. The briefing room doors closed behind him, sealing him into a new life. On the other side, Queen Charess prepared to address the Academy, to speak of unity and peace and the bonds between civilizations. She would be magnificent, inspiring, and alive, because one stubborn human child had chosen truth over protocol. Outside, somewhere in the vast machinery of galactic civilization, other operatives continued their work, hidden and patient. But now they faced something new, something unexpected. A human who had learned to see patterns in chaos, who had been taught by the best, who wore the Star of Preservation and carried his mother's legacy like a weapon. Kale Chen had defied rules before an alien queen. He had broken laws to prevent war. He had crossed every line that mattered and discovered that sometimes the only way to protect order was to embrace necessary chaos. The galaxy would learn to account for that, one truth at a time, one impossible choice after another, and humanity, watching from their distant world, would learn that their children were ready for the broader universe's demands. Not because humans were stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because some humans were stubborn enough to ask questions, brave enough to trust their judgment, and determined enough to finish what their parents started, no matter the cost. The briefing began. Kale listened, and somewhere in the vast dark between stars, his mother's ghost smiled.